Montana Territory, June 1871, the sun had barely crested the fur-lined ridge when Rowena Vaughn slipped through the back gate of the Miller farm, skirts mudded and breath catching in her throat. She moved fast and low, arms curled around a bundle of cloth pressed close to her chest. Inside were 4 warm eggs still smelling of straw and feathers. She did not hear the rooster this morning. Only the ache in her knees, the weight of hunger, and the soft whimpering of her daughter tied to her heart like a stone. Rowena cleared the fence, hit the ground on the other side, and ran. She ran until her legs gave out in the gully behind the church, where no one ever looked. She sank to her knees and clutched the eggs close, chest shaking. Then the tears came fast, hard, silent. She bowed her head and wept because she had stolen, and she was not sorry. A horse snorted nearby. She jerked up, eyes wide, and saw him tall in the saddle, a rifle slung behind his back, broad shoulders wrapped in a worn canvas duster. He had seen her. His eyes were dark, but not angry, not cruel, just watching. "I ain't gonna holler," he said. Rowena did not move. The cowboy dismounted, slow and careful, both hands visible. He looked like he was 30, maybe a little older. Dust clung to his boots and his jaw was rough with days of stubble, but his voice was steady. Gentle, he nodded at the cloth in her arms. "You took eggs." She pressed her lips together and turned halfway, ready to run again. He held up his hand. "Wait," she froze. "Is it for you?" he asked. "Or is someone hungry?" Rowena did not answer. He stepped closer. "You got a child?" A breath caught in her throat. "She's 4, he nodded once, then looked toward the sun climbing behind the ridge. "You ain't from around here?" "No," she whispered. He looked back at her, voice quiet now. "Where's her father?" Rowena swallowed hard. "Dead, shot last winter mid-trail. We were trying for Idaho, but his brother left us behind when the ox died. Said we'd slow him down." The man's jaw tightened. "You been alone since then?" She nodded, tears running again. He looked at her for a long moment. She did not know what he saw: a thief, a widow, a mother. Then he said simply, "Come home with me." Rowena stared. "What?" He took a step closer. "I got a cabin 5 miles west of here. It ain't fancy, but it is warm. I grow my own food, and there's always eggs. You and your little girl can come. You do not have to steal to feed her." She clutched the eggs tighter. "Why would you help me?" He gave a small shrug. "Because I saw a mother crying in the dirt, and I got no reason not to help." She hesitated. "You do not know me. You are feeding your child." "That is enough." Rowena looked at the eggs, then up at him. "What is your name?" "Landon McAllister." She blinked. "Rowena Vaughn." Landon nodded once. "Come on then." She followed. It took them more than an hour to reach the cabin, tucked in a small valley between 2 cottonwood stands. The land was quiet, the air sharp with pine and river water. Rowena had not seen a place like it since before the war. Landon tied his horse and helped her down. He did not touch her more than he had to. He opened the door and stepped back so she could go inside first. The cabin was warm from the morning fire. A little girl's dress hung drying on a line near the hearth. Rowena looked around, dazed. "You want to bring her in?" he asked. Rowena nodded and stepped outside. Her daughter, Tessa, was tucked in a wool blanket beneath a rock shelf nearby, hidden where Rowena had left her that morning. When she lifted the child into her arms, Tessa stirred and blinked up at her. "Mama, we are safe, baby." Rowena kissed her forehead. "We are safe now." Inside, Landon had already set a pan on the stove. He cracked 2 eggs into it and added a little salt. The smell of food filled the cabin. Rowena stood near the door, unsure. "You can sit," he said gently. She did. Tessa curled in her lap, warm and half asleep. Landon served them breakfast in silence. He poured hot water into a tin cup and passed it her way. It was not coffee, but it was warm. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "You can stay as long as you need." Rowena looked at the floor. "What do you want in return?" Landon's brows lifted. "Nothing." She stared at him, trying to understand. "I do not expect anything," he said. "I just do not want to see you or your girl go hungry." Rowena blinked hard and nodded. They stayed. That day he chopped wood while she swept the cabin. Tessa followed him everywhere, asking questions about the chickens, the horse, the dog. He answered everyone. That night, Rowena tucked Tessa into a small cot by the fire. The girl fell asleep fast, clean and warm for the first time in weeks. Rowena sat by the hearth, a cup of hot water in her hands. Landon sat across from her, quiet. "You lost someone," she said softly. He looked up. "Yes, she waited, my brother," he said. "He went to war and never came back. My folks died the winter after. I came west to make something quiet." "Something good," she nodded. "I know that kind of loss." He looked at her, steady. "Then maybe we can both start again." Rowena did not speak, but something settled inside her, a quiet weight lifting. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, it was warm. The first week passed without ceremony. Mornings rose cold and pale, the light slipping slow across the valley as if unsure it wanted to stay. Rowena rose early, always before Landon, and took to the garden without being asked. She moved between rows of young corn and early beans. Sleeves rolled above her elbows, her hands in the dirt like she'd been born to it. Tessa stayed close to her side at first, clinging to her skirt with one hand and a wooden spoon in the other. But by the third morning, she wandered to the creek behind the cabin, where Landon showed her how to stack flat stones and trickle water through them to catch crawdads. Rowena watched from across the field, leaning on a fence post. Landon squatted beside the little girl, pointing to a shallow pocket under the bank. Tessa crouched down and reached in, squealing when she pulled a small creature from the water. Rowena let herself smile. Later that evening, Landon repaired a cracked drawer in the kitchen while Rowena shelled peas at the table. "You always live alone?" she asked, eyes on her hands. He kept working, sliding the drawer open and closed to test the fit. "Mostly. I bunked with a friend when I first came west. We built a sod shelter near Helena, but he left to work the freight lines. I stayed. Couldn't see the point in chasing coin if it cost me quiet." She nodded. "I thought I'd settle near boys. My husband had kin there once, but the trail was worse than we thought. I started wondering if the place mattered at all." He straightened and dusted his hands. "Sometimes the place don't, but the people do." Rowena didn't answer right away. She set the peas aside and stood, brushing her palms on her skirt. "You mind if I wash clothes tomorrow?" "I saw a line out back. Use whatever you need." She hesitated. "I don't want to take too much." "You're not." Rowena met his eyes. "Why are you like this?" He leaned a hip against the counter. "Like what?" "Kind without asking anything for it." Landon crossed his arms. "Maybe I remember what it felt like needing something and not finding it." She looked down. "When I was young, my uncle used to say kindness was just weakness dressed up pretty. That's not true." It felt true for a long time. Landon's voice was low. "You're not weak, Rowena." She looked at him then, hard. "You don't know what I've had to do." "No, but I see what you're doing now." They stood in quiet for a moment, the fire snapping softly. "You want more tea?" he asked. She nodded. That night, after Tessa fell asleep curled against the dog, Rowena stepped out onto the porch. The clouds had cleared and the stars spilled thick across the sky. She sat on the top step, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Landon came out a few minutes later, 2 mugs in hand. He passed one to her and sat on the rail. They didn't speak. A coyote called low from the ridge. Wind passed through the pines like breath. Rowena sipped the tea. "I used to think I'd never trust a man again." Landon didn't look at her. "I don't expect you to." "I'm not saying I do. Just that I don't feel afraid here." He nodded slowly. "Don't take that to mean I'm ready for anything. I'm still figuring out what I am without him." "You take all the time you need." She looked at him, his profile lit by starlight. "You always this patient." "I can be." Rowena let the silence stretch between them again, and then, with a quiet voice she barely recognized as her own, she said, "Thank you for not asking me to be anything but what I am." Landon turned to her, and his answer was soft. "I reckon that's the only thing worth asking." They sat in the hush of the valley, just breathing, the air between them carrying something new, not a promise, not yet, but the beginning of something steady, something real. By late July, the wildflowers along the creek had gone to seed, and the sun came down heavy in the afternoons. Landon set fence posts past the cottonwoods while Rowena mended the seams on his shirts beneath the shade. Tessa napped on a quilt nearby, her cheeks flushed from chasing dragonflies. Rowena didn't ask questions about the land or the line he was setting. She just watched the way he measured each post with quiet certainty, how he moved through the grass with the rhythm of a man who belonged to the place. She'd never known what it looked like when a person had no one to answer to but the land itself. That evening, she peeled potatoes while Landon rubbed the dust from his arms at the basin. His shirt hung nearby, sun-faded and stiff from days in the field. "You always work alone out there?" she asked, not looking up, his hands stilled in the water. "Most times. Fence that long, I'd think you'd have help." "I've had help before," he said, "but not everyone stays long. Some folks don't take to the quiet the way I do." Rowena tipped the peelings into a pail. "I think quiet's the only thing that's kept me standing." He dried his arms and leaned against the wall, watching her. "You ever think about staying longer than a season?" She set the knife down. "You mean here?" "I mean wherever you feel steady. Could be here, could be somewhere else." Rowena picked up the pail and carried it to the door, dumping the scraps near the hens. When she returned, she wiped her hands and leaned against the table, arms folded. "I ain't sure I know what steady feels like," she said. "I was 17 when I left Kentucky. Married a man I barely knew because he said he'd keep me fed. Then the war came, and all the men who promised things disappeared into it." Landon didn't speak. "I've never chosen a home," she went on. "Always ended up where someone else dropped me." He stepped forward, voice low. "You're not being dropped now." Rowena met his gaze. "This place, it's good, but I keep waiting for it to be taken. Like maybe I'm standing in someone else's life, and they're coming back for it." Landon's brow creased. "You think I'd offer something I didn't mean to keep? I think I don't know what it feels like to be wanted without owing." He looked at her then, not with pity, but with something rooted and still. "You don't owe me, you never did." She turned away, blinking hard. "I just need more time." "You've got it," he said. That night, Tessa woke coughing, her cheeks hot to the touch. Rowena sat beside her through the dark hours, wiping her brow with a damp cloth, whispering lullabies she hadn't sung since Tennessee. Landon brought water and stayed by the hearth, stoking the flame when it dropped. He didn't hover, just stayed close. By dawn, the fever broke. Tessa curled into sleep, breath even again. Rowena stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself. The air was cool and damp with dew, the ridge just beginning to glow. Landon was already on the porch, boots unlaced, elbows on his knees. "She's resting now," Rowena said. He nodded. "You need sleep too." "I will." She sat beside him. They listened to a sparrow call from the brush. "She called you Papa once," Rowena said after a while. He glanced at her. She was half asleep, didn't know what she was saying. Landon looked out at the field. Didn't sound like she was wrong. Rowena's breath caught. "I didn't plan on any of this," she said. "Neither did I." She turned to him. "What are you hoping for?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "That maybe you'll let this place be yours too, not because you owe me, just because you want it." Rowena studied his face, the way the light touched the edge of his jaw, the way he didn't look away. "I'm not ready to say what I want yet," she whispered. He nodded. "I'll wait." She reached for his hand, tentative at first. He didn't move, just let her fingers find his. They sat that way until the sun cleared the ridge and the world warmed around them. By early August, the sound of hammers echoed down the valley. Landon had started framing a small lean-to off the north side of the cabin, saying little about it except that extra space never hurt. Rowena didn't press him. She brought him water when the sun stood high and sanded the door frame smooth where his hands hadn't yet reached. Tessa watched from a patch of shade, legs tucked under her, tracing shapes in the dirt with a stick. One afternoon, while Landon was marking roof beams with a length of twine, Rowena leaned against the corner post and said, "You mean for it to be a room?" He didn't look up. "Figured your girl might want her own space come winter." Rowena studied the lines of the frame, the way the shadows slanted across the floorboards. "She will." Landon wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "Walls'll hold heat better if I insulate with dried moss and clay. Might take a few days to gather enough." "I can help," she offered. He nodded, but didn't answer right away. "Then, you ever build a wall?" "No," she said. "But I've watched men who didn't know what they were doing stack logs sideways for hours. I can do better than that." He chuckled low. "I believe it." They worked in tandem for the next few days, and with each hour, something in the air between them shifted, less caution, more ease. When Rowena laughed at something Tessa said, Landon would glance over, not startled by the sound anymore, but drawn to it. She caught him watching once. He didn't look away. That evening, after Tessa had fallen asleep with her new pine doll tucked in beside her, Rowena stepped onto the porch with 2 folded blankets in her arms. "I thought I'd beat the moths to these," she said. "Tessa and I won't need both come fall." Landon took one from her hands. "You've been mending them, 1 stitch at a time. I like the quiet of it." He unfolded the blanket, running a hand along the edge. "This pattern's from the South. My mother had one near like it. She sewed it before the march started," Rowena said. "Carried it across 4 states." Landon looked at her. "You've had it that long. It was mine before I ever had a husband." She sat on the top stair. "Feels strange, thinking how many pieces of my life I left behind and this one stayed." He settled beside her. "There's something to be said for things that hold up." Rowena glanced over. "You always speak in quiet truths. Only when I know they count." She turned the hem of the blanket over in her lap. "I don't know what to do with this kind of steadiness." Landon didn't move. "You don't have to do anything with it, just let it be." Rowena tilted her head, studying him. "Did you ever want a family?" "I thought I might," he said. "But I never found someone who saw me plain and didn't try to make me into something else." Her voice caught in her throat. "And now, I see a woman who shoulders more than her share and still makes room for others. That's not something I'd look past." Rowena's fingers tightened on the wool between them. "I'm not whole, Landon." He turned to face her fully. "I don't need whole, I need honest." She breathed in slow, then let it out. "I keep waiting to feel like I belong." "You do." It wasn't said to convince her. It was said as if the truth had been sitting there all along, waiting for her to notice it. She reached out, her hand finding his. He didn't flinch, didn't question it. Just turned his palm to meet hers, fingers warm and rough and steady. Inside, Tessa made a soft sound in her sleep. Rowena listened, heart full. "You sure about this?" she asked quietly. "I've been sure since the first time you stayed." Rowena shifted closer. "Then I reckon I'll stop waiting for something to go wrong." Landon looked at her, and for the first time let himself smile in full. "Good." That night when they stepped back into the cabin, the quiet wasn't empty anymore, it was shared, shaped by the presence of 2 people who had stopped guarding themselves long enough to be known. And in the stillness that followed, Rowena knew she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was home. The first frost came early that year, thin and silver across the fields by mid-September. Rowena stood at the window before dawn, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching the mist crawl low across the ground. Behind her, the fire cracked and settled. Tessa stirred in her cot but didn't wake. Landon stepped into the room, boots soft on the floorboards. He'd been outside already, his coat hung damp across the hook, sleeves darkened with creek water. He carried a wooden pail half filled with trout, their scales glinting faint in the firelight. Rowena turned. "You set lines last night," he nodded. Didn't want to risk the river freezing over without one last catch. She took the pail from him and set it near the wash basin. "You always think ahead." Landon shrugged, then reached for a towel. "I've seen what happens when you don't." Rowena rinsed the fish in silence, her hands steady and quick. "You planning to stay here through the snow this time?" His gaze held hers. "I was hoping we would, that we settled between them without hesitation." Later that morning, Landon brought down a box from the loft, wrapped in oilskin and smelling faintly of cedar. He set it on the table and stepped back. "I built this the winter after Ma died," he said. "Didn't have much use for it after, but I kept it." Rowena untied the string. Inside lay a patchwork quilt, thick and tightly stitched, each square a different shade of blue or brown. Tucked beneath it were 2 smaller bundles, one of linen scraps, the other of braided horsehair. Tessa climbed onto the bench, watching with wide eyes. "Is it for me?" Landon grinned. "It's for all of us now." Rowena traced a finger along the edge of the quilt. "You made this yourself," he nodded. "Didn't have much else to keep my hands busy that year." She looked up at him, something soft blooming behind her ribs. "You've always known how to wait things out, haven't you? Long enough to know when something's worth staying for." That night, after Tessa had fallen asleep beneath the new quilt, Rowena lingered by the hearth, the light low and red across the floor. Landon sat across from her, sleeves rolled, whittling the edge of a wooden spoon with a pocket knife. I keep thinking about the road that brought me here, Rowena murmured. It twisted so hard in places I didn't think I'd survive it. Landon set the spoon aside. You did more than survive, she folded her hands. There were days I thought I'd have to keep moving forever, like I wasn't meant to rest anywhere. You've done more resting here than running. I didn't expect to feel wanted again. Landon stood and crossed the space between them. You are. Every part of you, she tilted her chin up. I don't want to leave this place. You don't have to, he said. You can stay with me, not just for another season, for good. Rowena's throat tightened. And if I say yes, then I'll build you a proper room, not just for Tessa, for all of us. I'll put in a root cellar, dig a new wellhead come spring. Whatever you need, I'll make it. She reached for his hand. I don't need more than this. Landon leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. Her fingers curled into his, and in that quiet, the promise between them settled like earth after rain. They were married the following Sunday, under the cottonwoods at the edge of the creek. Reverend Doolin came from 3 towns over, arriving in a wagon with his wife and a basket of preserves. Tessa wore a dress dyed with walnut husks and carried a bouquet of dried goldenrod. She stood between them, grinning so wide her cheeks dimpled. Rowena wore a dress she'd let out twice, hemmed again with care. Landon wore the same coat he'd worn the day he first saw her in the gully, but this time his jaw was clean-shaven, and his eyes held no weight but joy. They spoke their vows with hands clasped, voices sure. No grand declarations, just truths that needed no dressing. When the Reverend said, "You may seal it," Landon kissed her slow and certain, like he'd known her always. The neighbors stayed for stew and apple cake, and when the sun dipped behind the ridge, someone brought out a fiddle. Rowena danced barefoot in the grass, Tessa spinning beside her, and Landon watched from the porch, his heart fuller than he'd thought a man's could be by winter's end. The lean-to was finished, and Rowena's sewing had filled a trunk with linens. Landon cleared a space behind the barn for a kitchen garden, and Tessa learned to read from the old primer Rowena kept wrapped in muslin. They shared the work of the land and the warmth of each evening, and when the wind howled through the eaves, they held each other close, knowing the storm outside had nothing left to take. Years passed quiet and steady. The cabin grew, and so did the laughter within it. They planted fruit trees along the ridge. Tessa painted the walls with pressed flowers and carved her name into the doorframe. Rowena's hands grew calloused with work but soft in love, and Landon never stopped reaching for her each morning like it was the first. They built a life not from grand gestures but from small, certain acts wood stacked straight, bread shared warm, hands held in silence. And in that valley, tucked between cottonwoods and sky, they wrote a kind of love that didn't need to be spoken to be known. They had each other. And they had peace.